Hey everyone, welcome to the second day of the University Experience Workshop, an event held by the Youth Voices of Ontario. Today we have our second speaker, Renelle, who studies at the University of Waterloo as an architecture student. Here she is. So, Renelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, as Maria said, my name is Renelle, and I'm studying architecture at the University of Waterloo. And the more official program name is the Honors Architectural Studies program, and it is a co-op program. And it's also held at the Cambridge campus, which is around a 30-minute drive south from Waterloo.
Okay. Yeah. Like yesterday, we're gonna be having this format of questions. The interview will be more or less loose structured, so we might stray away from some topics. However, we'll cover all of the questions on the slide. So I guess you've already answered the first question: what do you study and which program you're enrolled in? So how did you first get interested in this program?
For me, and I think this is like a very common theme with like a lot of new coming architecture students, I was really interested in arts, like especially visual arts, but I was also a very like science-oriented person throughout high school. So I thought architecture would be like the perfect marriage between both subjects because architecture is very much about design and drawing, but there's also like the engineering side of it, like the structural aspects, the physics aspects. So I thought that studying architecture would allow me to kind of explore both of my interests within one space and within the subject of buildings. And I also kind of received guidance from my art teacher from grade 10 to help me make that decision. For me, it was kind of like a last minute decision to do architecture because I was focusing more on the STEM subjects, like applying to physics, but she encouraged me to kind of take my talents and my skills in art and just go for architecture. She recommended to me this program, which I actually didn't know about until the beginning of grade 12. And yeah, she helped me make my portfolio and everything, and here I am.
So, do you feel like you've made a good decision with the program?
I think so, yeah. I mean, like I'm only in first year, so I've only completed one term, and I feel like I definitely haven't like had enough experience to know for sure like if it's for me, but I can definitely say I'm enjoying it, and like I don't regret my decision at all because this is like a really great program in many ways, and we'll definitely like touch on it in the other questions, like the benefits of everything.
Nice. That's good to hear. So, what kind of jobs can you really pursue with this degree? And do people tend to go into the workforce or grad school after it?
So I think the good part about architecture is that you can do both, like it's really flexible. The grad school route, which would be taking your master's, you would have to do if you want to be a licensed architect. Like you legally can't like say I am an architect without taking your master's and then taking the proper exams. So grad school is definitely one path many people take, obviously. But even with a bachelor's alone, you can still go into many design careers. You can go into like more engineering routes. You can go into more design routes, like interior design. You can also go into more of like the construction side of things. So there's definitely a lot of possibilities no matter what you want to do. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
How are you, like, I know it's just the beginning of your educational journey in architecture, but how are you feeling? Like, where would you
I
like to
think
go?
I've always wanted to do grad school. Like it's just kind of been my thing. Like I've wanted to go to university, do my master's and all that. So I probably will do my master's, not just for the sake of doing it, but I also think like, especially for architecture, once you complete undergrad, your master's, you kind of get to explore your own interests. Like talking about Waterloo specifically, one of the benefits of this program is that if you complete the undergrad at this school, you automatically get into master's if you have an average of 70 or above. So you don't need to submit a portfolio or anything. And since it's a 5-year program and they make it very vigorous because of the co-op, they essentially make you do something like a thesis during your 4th year, which means that you're able in your master's to do whatever subject you'd like because you've already gotten like the more technical parts of it over with in undergrad.
Right.
So I think doing masters would be really fun. I've even heard from some master's students that they're finding it easier than undergrad because it's so open-ended and you kind of can just like do whatever you want. So yeah, I think it's definitely like a good path to take.
Sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah.
So why did you choose Waterloo to pursue architecture in?
I think like for most Waterloo students, it's definitely the co-op. Like the co-op is like Waterloo's biggest seller. And talking about architecture specifically, like there's not too many architecture programs in Canada because it's more of like a niche program. So Waterloo happens to be like, I think the only program in Canada with a proper co-op, or at least the only one that has like 2 years worth of paid co-op, which is really awesome because it gives you that practical experience that's really difficult to get in a classroom.
Right.
And you also get to go to Rome during, I think it's your fall term in 4th year, which is really exciting. They're the only Canadian architecture school with a permanent studio outside of Canada. So they have their own building in Rome, and you get to go around Italy and learn about Italian architecture, and it sounds really exciting. So
oh my God.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big upsides of this program.
That is exciting.
I know, yeah.
How long would you get to go there for?
You go there for 1 term, so I think it's in the fall term, which means you go from September to December, so around like 3.5 months. Yeah.
I see. Damn.
Yeah. Pretty exciting.
That is, yeah.
Yeah, and also like asides that, I've just kind of heard that it has like a pretty great reputation within the architecture community because it has like the program itself has a large focus on design and like the practical sides of architecture. So like for example, our studio classes take up like more than half of our week. And we do get to learn about like the theory and the structural components of architecture, but a lot of it we kind of just put into our studio practices. Like it's more of a focus on studio rather than just learning about the theory, as opposed to like the other 2 programs that I applied to for architecture, U of T, they're kind of more focused on the theory and the art side of things, while McGill is more focused on engineering. So it kind of just depends on what you're more interested in. But I think like if you're really set on going into architecture and you want to become an architect, this is probably the program for you because you'll get the most experience out of it.
Right. So you've mentioned studio classes.
Yeah.
Is it like office hours?
For studio, it's a very different format from other classes. You can kind of like separate our classes into studio and lecture-based classes. So studio, it's usually 2 or 3 days out of the week, and you usually have like an 8-hour studio day, so around from 9 to 5. And the professors are always there during studio, or at least almost always, like especially like during deadlines and stuff, they'll be walking around the whole time. So for that, you don't really need office hours because studio is almost like the office hours. Studio is good because like even though it's considered an 8-hour day according to your official schedule, you don't have to be there. It's just kind of like work time. So if you work better at home, you can work at home, you can go to the library, or obviously you can work in studio. You get like your own designated big desk and you can decorate it, you can put all your supplies there. You can work there as long as you want, and you can even work like after hours. The building is technically open 24/7, although they say that they prefer like you leave by midnight, so that like just for like security purposes, they kind of changed it during COVID. Before that, it used to be like 24/7, but as long as you're in the building, they don't kick you out. So if you're the type of person who likes working more towards the evening, you can kind of stay at home at the beginning of the day, go later, or it's kind of just up to you. It's just that the professors will be there from 9 to 5 only. So that's like your main opportunity to ask questions about your designs and stuff. But yeah, for the lecture-based classes, yeah, there are office hours. You don't necessarily use them a lot though, because I think they're very helpful during the classes. They're 3-hour lectures, and they take breaks in between where you can ask questions. Usually most of your questions can be answered through email, just due to the nature of the subjects themselves. For building construction, it's pretty straightforward. And then for the other like more history and philosophical based classes, those are more like open-ended, and you don't really need office hours for that unless you just want to like chat with the professor. So yeah, I think like they do a good job of like providing enough help in this program where you don't really need to reach out like outside of class too often, unless you're just really looking for like that extra support. So yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess kind of straying away from university topics, how was the supplementary essay portfolio process for you?
Yeah, so that's definitely like the biggest part of admissions, like even more so than grades, I would say. It's the portfolio. That's what professors will tell you too. So like you can kind of break down the admissions process into like 3 parts. The first part is your grades and your AIF. And like if anyone's watching right now, you probably know what the AIF is by now. It's just like a Waterloo thing where you have to fill out this additional form where you list your grades, your extracurriculars, your awards, just to kind of like make a personal profile of yourself so that they can kind of get to know you a little better. It's not required for all programs, although like you're encouraged to do it no matter what. But it is required for the more competitive programs like computer science, engineering, and architecture is one of them where it's required. So you do that and you submit your grades, or OUAC does. So that's like the first part. And once you pass that part, which happens around February, you would get an email around mid-March saying that you've passed the first part of the process and now you're invited to complete the portfolio and the proceed. So the portfolio, most important, obviously. So Waterloo is really nice because their portfolio is completely open-ended. They kind of just recommend that you have somewhere between 12 to 20 pieces, I would say, but there's no page limit, there's no requirements, there's no like set pieces you have to make for them. They just say to put together your own thing based on what you've made, your own interests. They even encourage you to include things that maybe are creative but not necessarily art related. So you can put a performance of your piano piece if you want, or you can do a dance performance. Anything that's creative, they encourage you to put. So I don't know how that changes when you're doing in person. I think one of the major things that's changing is the whole like online process. So for me, last year, we still had to do online everything. But this year, you get the option of picking online or in person, which is really exciting because like you can pick what you want and you'll like probably never get to have that opportunity in the future. So I think you should really be wise about what you pick. For the in-person interview, you might not be able to like, for example, show like a music performance or something like that. And also like it can be more nerve-wracking for some people. Like you can't exactly prepare what you want to say as much because they'll be asking you questions about your pieces because you also have to bring them in person. Whereas if you choose online, you submit a pre-recorded presentation that's around 10 minutes. So you can completely choose what to say, what pieces to highlight. Like if you have a piece that's kind of weaker, you can just like maybe not talk about it as much. And it might be better for those who are more anxious about speaking in person. So I think it's really exciting that you get that opportunity to choose. So yeah, I think you should just be wise about what you pick and like think about the pros and cons of each. So in terms of the actual portfolio and what to include, like that's also like the main questions that people ask is like, oh, should I include this piece, or like what's the order, or what kind of pieces I should make. I feel like you shouldn't overthink it too much. Like you can kind of use your intuition and like think about the pieces that you've made the best and try to put them together in order to tell a story about your artwork and also like your progress as an individual and an artist. For me, like I was an IB diploma student and I didn't take art in my senior years. So that was definitely like something that hindered me in terms of producing art and producing a portfolio. So for me, I really wanted to highlight my progress from my grades 9 and 10 art, which is where I actually took art classes, to the present day where I was just kind of doing things on the side amidst like the heavy workload of IB. So I ended up structuring my portfolio with the more traditional pieces at the beginning, more from my early years, and then moving into the more like 3D sculptural, more meaningful pieces that I produced more recently. And I think that in and of itself kind of tells a story about you as an individual. Even if you don't have like a theme to your artwork, there's many ways that you can tell a story. And you can even organize things like in terms of design. Like you can organize the more colorful things at the beginning, move into the more like technical monochrome pieces in the middle, which is what I did. And then the more 3D, like more creative, abstract pieces towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
So there's many different things you can do with your portfolio, and you should just do what you think is best for your artwork. Don't try to produce your artwork in order to fit the standard that you need, like you think it needs to be. You should take the art styles and the stuff you've already produced and figure out how you can highlight your qualities as an artist the best. And that's what will give you the best shot into getting in. I think that's like the thing that people really make a mistake with, is like trying to compare themselves to people who've already gotten in or other applicants and trying to see how they can make their artwork more this style or that style. But in the end, you don't truly know what they want. So the best thing to do is to take your own best qualities in your artwork and showcase that. And it'll also make it easier on you because you know what you're best at. So it'll just reduce stress and reduce the amount of time you're spending just like pondering over what you should do. Whereas rather you should be spending time making things and making a lot of things so you can curate what you want to show them. I think that's my best advice for the portfolio. In terms of like what to make, the only thing I would say is try to incorporate more 3D stuff into your portfolio. I'm sure like people who are applying, they're usually pretty good at traditional art, which makes sense because those are the subjects that are actually taught in school. But architecture is not really taught in high school unless you have it as an elective. And so people may kind of overlook the 3D aspect of art. And architecture is a 3D medium. So I encourage you to try to make something, even if it's just one thing, in 3D, so that you can demonstrate that you can think in 3D. So for me, like I was one of those people who was always like into traditional art, so I hadn't really made a lot of 3D things. And my teacher suggested this really cool idea of taking like a really large sheet of paper, taking an X-Acto knife, and then cutting a bunch of waves into it. And then after that's done, you kind of like mold and bend the paper so that those waves then create more 3D waves. And then when you go to photograph it, find a good plain background, some dramatic lighting, and it ends up creating really cool shadows. And it demonstrates that you can not only create sculptural 3D art, but you can also photograph it, and you understand how lights and shadows interact with a 3D object, which is something that's like super important in architecture. So I think even something as simple as that can end up looking really beautiful, and you can like attach like an analogy to it. Like for me, I've always been a big swimmer, so I attached that to like the analogy of a swimming pool. So I think there's like a lot of possibilities, and you can make it really simple if you want, like I did. So yeah, I encourage you to just try it. You don't have to overcomplicate it if you're not good at it. But yeah, I encourage you to do that. And also, like, I think most people would know this by now, but don't try to make it too architectural. They want you to stray away from including like things like floor plans or just anything super technical if you've already done that before, because they want to teach you that stuff.
Right.
And the more technical stuff you include, the easier it is for them to point out mistakes in your work. So they kind of want to see your potential as an architect, not like what you can do as an architect already. So don't worry about trying to make it all architectural, because they just want to see creativity. That's what like the main idea is.
That's actually what I wanted to ask next. Like, should people incorporate more architectural stuff or just artist stuff? But I guess you just answered that.
Yeah, I know there's like people who like transfer between programs. So if you're already in an architectural program, or like in high school you've had a lot of architectural training, maybe you've taken classes or you've done like extracurriculars related to it, you can definitely showcase that you have knowledge in architecture, but try to focus on like the conceptual part of it. Don't just show like the final product and that's it. They want to see like how you came to that point, maybe your different iterations. So they just kind of want to see like the design process, even if you've done architectural work, and not just like the technical parts of it. So yeah, like even if you have a lot of architectural experience, there's still a way to showcase it in a more like artful, creative way.
I see.
Yeah.
That's surprising.
Yeah. And then there's also the perceive. Like I should probably touch on that briefly, because that's like the third biggest component.
The what?
So you're not invited to the perceive. Like once you pass the grades round, you're invited to do both. So usually you submit your portfolio like beginning of April, and then at the end of April you write your perceive. For us, it was online. I think once again for you this year, it would be you have the choice. For us online, it was a lot less stressful, obviously, writing a perceive at home, because you were in the comfort of your own home, no one like proctoring you. But the downside to that is like there's always issues with uploading. Like that's kind of like the worry. Although like they are flexible with it, like they're not gonna like reject you if you're a minute late. Like it's nothing like that. But it can be like a worry sometimes. So if you go in person, like that worry is completely eliminated. Like maybe if you're more of a traditional person, like you don't want to worry about taking photos, submitting, all that, then in person is the way to go. In terms of what the perceive is, if you don't know, it's basically a summarization of a body of text. So essentially, what you need to know how to do is how to be concise, how you can interpret a text and pick out the main ideas from it and put them together in a way that's still cohesive and understandable, but you've taken out all the filler from it basically. So they're basically judging your ability to think critically about what you see in the world and how you can take it and make it more understandable to others, which I think is like a very important skill, like no matter what program you're in. So like it's definitely like it's a good way to test the applicants, but it's not as scary as it might sound. Just think of it as a summarization, which I'm sure like all of you have done before, like at some point in your life. The text is usually around like 3 to 4 pages, so it is pretty lengthy, but you get 2 hours to do it. So let's say like you take a good 20 minutes to read through it. You can choose to like write a rough draft and then take that and or you can just kind of do one draft, although they recommend you have some rough notes at least, but you have plenty of time to kind of like digest the content, to like highlight key ideas.
Right.
So I think like that's not really something you have to worry about too much in terms of preparation. Most people I know, they didn't really prepare for this exercise, other than maybe like looking up what a perceive is, like maybe getting examples from their English teacher, which is what I did. Maybe like finding videos online of how to do it, or like trying an example on your own, like I would really recommend doing that if you have the time. But other
Okay.
than that, like you don't have to stress about it too much. Like it will happen naturally, like as you're doing it. Like it will come to you with the stress of the time limit. So
The adrenaline,
yeah. And then at the end of the PC, you also do like a summarization of the entire text in 2 sentences. So maybe that's something you also want to practice, because obviously summarizing 4 pages of stuff in 2 sentences is crazy. I think it was actually, no, it was 2 sentences. So like it will be a run-on sentence for sure, but maybe that's something you can practice, because it's not as much writing. You could just test yourself, like find maybe like an article and challenge yourself, like what was the main idea of this text and how descriptive can I be about it within 2 sentences. I feel like you could probably do an exercise like that before you do your PC, and it doesn't take too much time. So yeah.
So I assume to apply you'd need to have a good English grade from the sounds of it.
So okay, yeah, we have a question about grades, so like I can kind of go there. I don't know like how much they expect beyond like the cutoff they give. I have the cutoff written down. Let me see what it was. I believe like for all of the subjects, the cutoff is around 70 to 75%. So it's not too bad. And I don't think like once again, I don't think grades are really like a big thing. They generally say that you should aim for like mid to high 80s, like as your admissions average for this program. So yeah, as long as your English average is above the cutoff, I think you'll be okay. As long as it's not like weighing down your average too much. But beyond just grades, you probably should have like a good understanding of English, and your English skills should be decent enough to be able to write a good précis. So there's definitely that aspect. But I think that could probably be said for like any program with any cutoff. Like you have to be good enough to do the requirements. But yeah, I think the précis is not as bad as it sounds. And even if you don't think you're good at English, like as long as maybe you practice like being able to summarize, you'll be okay with the précis. Yeah. In terms of like maybe the other subjects, the top 6 requirements for this program is English, obviously, advanced functions, calculus, and physics. So those are definitely like pretty hefty subjects. So like in order to get into this program, like you probably have already taken these subjects, or you're gonna finish taking them next semester. So yeah, I think like the minimum grade you need for those is 70, and then English is 75 when they got in. As long as like maybe other areas are kind of making up for maybe like 1 or 2 like just minimum grades that you have, like it's not a big deal. So yeah.
Do they recommend taking any art courses for this?
Yeah, like under like the hard requirements, they have like a sentence that's like, we recommend taking like art classes, geography and history classes, and also doing independent art studies, which makes sense because like you want to have like experience in art to make a portfolio and stuff. So yeah, for me, I was an IB, and we had to take geography as like an SL subject, if you know what that is, like it's standard level. So that was probably like a help to me, and maybe it might have contributed to my admissions, because we have to take 2 terms of geography, and it definitely is helpful in terms of learning about like the physical conditions of each country and like the cultures, and that kind of impacts like how you design as an architect. So yeah, it's really not necessary, but it's just kind of helpful to give you maybe context in some of your classes. So yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
So about high school, did you have any extracurriculars you did that you think may have helped?
I took my AIF stuff and I have it like pasted here. Like I think For the AIF, you don't just have to put like school extracurriculars, you can also just put like general hobbies that you have. And you also specify like how long you've been doing them, how many hours a week you dedicate. So for me, like I like music has always been a really big part of my life. So a lot of my stuff was like the music extracurriculars I've done. So I put that I do piano and I also do classical voice. And I've been doing those for like more than 8 years. For piano, it's been like 13. And obviously, like I've dedicated a lot of hours into my life doing all of that stuff. So I thought it was important to write those things down. It kind of demonstrates that like I have a passion outside of school and that I can like dedicate my time to other things in my life and kind of like enhance my skills in other ways outside of just like the subjects I take in school. So if you have any hobbies, even if you don't take lessons or anything, you should definitely write them down because it just like shows your character as a person. I also put down art, like even I just like kind of do it in my free time, but if you just put an estimate of like maybe how long you've done art for, how often you do it, like even if it's not often, which was my case, like in terms of just like a hobby outside of my portfolio, that's still okay. Like anything helps for the AIF. And then in terms of school, I was in student council in grade 12 and I was like one of the graphic designers. You obviously know that. Yeah. I did the merch design for our IB class because that was just kind of like our tradition every year to make sweaters and like little cookies for the grade 11 cohort. So I designed the logo for that.
Was this year?
Yeah. I designed that logo. So.
Oh my god, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I also put that I was like a student leader for orientation, like for the grade 9s. So that's kind of just like a leadership kind of role. So yeah, I think those are like the main things that I put in terms of extracurriculars. And there's also like an awards section. So I happen to have a lot of awards just because of music, although they're not necessarily like crazy. Like any certificates that you have, like just put them down because they might help you, they might not. But you know, it's helpful to just put down anything. So like maybe like some of my main ones is there's this McMaster art fair. So some of my art has been featured in that because our grade 9 art teacher would kind of just like pick some of the best pieces and submit those. So I wrote that down. I wrote down some of my music awards from school. I wrote down, now I don't know like if you have to do this. I just did it because it's Waterloo, but I put down one of my math contests from Waterloo because I was like, even if it's architecture, they might find it impressive. Okay. So I won first place in grade 7, and I was like, it's grade 7, but it was first place. So I was like, you know what, maybe it'll be impressive to them. So I threw that down. I put down that I have like CPR certificates because that shows that I've done swimming. I put down some of my RCM exams. Like RCM is just kind of like music education. So like if you're taking lessons, you take an exam for each grade. So I just kind of put down those certificates. In grade 10 civics class, we had like this program called the YPI, which was the Youth Philanthropy Initiative. So it's just kind of like you interview a grassroots organization and you make a presentation on why they would deserve a grant for money and what it would do to help that organization. And I won first place with my group, so I thought it was important to put that down because it was a really big like leadership role too. And we won $5,000 towards that charity. It was split between multiple people though because COVID kind of messed things up and we couldn't do the final presentation. But yeah, I think that was like a pretty big deal. So that was like my main one. And I also put down that I did like music competitions. I had a master class with this opera singer who's pretty famous. So you can put down like a really wide range of things. So even if you think like it's not relevant or it's not important, like you never know. And I think it's useful to just kind of like show all the things you've achieved in your recent years. Yeah.
So this is just a question that's relevant to Waterloo. regarding math competitions. Have you participated in the CSMC and Euclid?
I did the Euclid. I didn't do the CSMC. For architecture, you don't need to take any math contest. I just kind of did it because I have somewhat of an interest in math, and I thought like it would be helpful for me. But you really don't need to if you don't want to. So yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Because like I know for CS it's required.
Yeah, I think for computer science, like it makes sense, like especially since it's Waterloo, like, and the contests are by Waterloo, so like you have to take it for those. But for architecture, it's completely different. I don't think like it's too much of a concern for them, especially because like the people who are looking at admissions in the first place for architecture are probably not well versed in like the other math programs anyway. So yeah, it's not required, but I just took the Euclid, like also because I was like, it's a Waterloo contest, it might help me.
Sure
Obviously,
enough.
when you're an applicant, like you always want to err on the side of like, oh, I should do as much as I can. So, but like as someone who's already been through it, I would say like if you don't care that much about math, if it's not your thing, then don't do it. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess we've pretty much covered everything about high school.
Yeah.
So about the program itself, how's the atmosphere in it? How do you feel that you're a part of a community?
I think it's kind of like one of the pros I would say about this program actually, that there's a pretty good sense of community in our program because it's a satellite campus. So our campus is only architecture, which means that there's usually not too many students in our school at a time because half of the people are usually on co-op. So in first year you don't have any co-op, and it's really like a good opportunity to just kind of like be with your classmates all the time. And each cohort has around 75 to 85 students. So obviously like that's a pretty small number of students for like one single program to be in.
Yeah.
So especially with the schedule that we have with like the super long hours and being in studio after class, like you have a lot of opportunity to talk to your peers, and you're all like in the same boat. So you end up talking to them a lot, like you end up making friends pretty easily. So I'd say like the community aspect is like one of the benefits of this program, and even just like being on a different campus, like you really just like form your own bubble of people that like you can rely on, especially with design, since you're always asking for people's opinions. Like you're always going to be talking to people, the people beside you. So I think that's like maybe something that really contrasts like other programs that may have like a much larger enrollment of people, and where you might not have schedules that coincide. Because the first years, and I think this goes all the way until third year, you have the exact same schedule. So you're always going to be together, and you'll find a way to make friends, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, I see. So I guess in first year you don't really get much of a choice in course selection?
I think like that also kind of becomes a downside of this program. Like if you're looking to maybe like combine architecture with like a minor or something, that's something you can't do in this program. You can't take a minor here. As opposed to U of T and McGill, you can take a minor, or you can even do double major. But because this is an honors program, I think this is the same for a lot of other Waterloo programs maybe. If it's honors, you might not have time in your schedule to take electives, and therefore you can't take a minor. So that's definitely something you need to consider when you're applying, is that like if you maybe want more flexibility in your schedule, or like you've been wanting to take electives, that's not really possible here. Like it's very focused on architecture only, which also explains why we're kind of a separate campus. Like everything is taught at this campus. You'll never have to go to main campus for any of your courses. So you kind of can't do that anyway if you don't have room in your schedule. So yeah, it's kind of like its own little environment where you take all your classes there. So starting from third year, you can take electives, but those electives are still offered by the satellite campus, and they're still like related to ARC. Like all of your course codes will have ARC in front of them. So if you're ever hoping to take an elective that's like a completely different subject, you probably won't be able to do that. Yeah.
So at your campus, do you only have architecture, or are there several other majors also?
It's only architecture, but there's also an architectural engineering program at our university, and they're located on main campus, but they sometimes come here for certain classes. And I think for one of their terms, they actually spend the whole term in Cambridge so that they can spend time in their own design studio. Like I think architectural engineering, it's very much a bridge between our architecture program and also like the engineering programs on main campus. You get to spend time on main campus because that's where you're located, but you still have the chance to like experience studio life for a term, and you kind of get to like dabble in the art side of things, but you still get to do like math courses and like the actual engineering parts of the program. So yeah, that's like the only other major I would really say that like comes to our campus.
Wow.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, it's definitely like its own little like bubble within Waterloo. And okay, here's some backstory. We like it was not necessarily like a willing choice to be like a satellite campus. We were on main campus until 2004, but there was not enough space for like our program. Like our classrooms were super small, and like studios would be like overflowing with people. Like there was just not enough room for students to work, and it was always like a pretty big concern. So they like ultimately made the choice that they need to leave and find a bigger space to accommodate the students. So I think the city of Cambridge offered us a factory building, an old factory building. So they took that and they're like, hey, this is our new campus. Which is kind of funny because like I think people come in with the expectation that like, oh, it's architecture, the building must be beautiful. But in our case, it was just kind of like, it was the most like environmentally friendly choice to make, to take like an old building and just kind of refurbish it. And I think our program is considered the most green program in terms of architecture in the country. So I guess that kind of contributes to it, like taking an old building and upcycling it. So yeah.
Honestly, that's really good.
Yeah, it is good. Yeah, like even if you think it's ugly, like it still serves a good purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it gives you the space and all that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And it's not like, obviously it doesn't actually look like you're in a factory. Like they've renovated it really nicely, and there's just like maybe elements that are reminiscent of a factory, like the roofs and all like the plumbing and the piping and stuff. Like you can kind of see that above. I guess it's kind of more of an industrial feel. But yeah, it's just maybe like different from main campus buildings, that it doesn't look brand new. But yeah, it's still pretty cool, I think.
So what's Cambridge like? Is it a busy city, or is it just you guys? Or like how's the atmosphere there?
I think like maybe this is like a con for some people, maybe it's a pro, but it's definitely like a lot quieter than Waterloo. And even Waterloo itself, like it's a city, but it's still considered like on the smaller side. So Cambridge, in comparison to that, is even smaller. It's more so a town. I would say like the demographic is mostly like elderly people. Like it's not, since there's like not really other universities in Cambridge, like it sometimes does feel like it's just us. I mean, there are high schoolers around, but I think for the most part, like it's us that kind of like changes the demographic. So yeah, I would definitely say that like a lot of people tend to like kind of go outside of the city whenever they want to like go out for a day or hang out or have fun. But there's not usually too much time to do that anyway, so it doesn't end up being like a super big deal. But it takes some time to kind of orient yourself to like a smaller town if you're not from a smaller town already. So yeah, I think that can kind of be a con. Like if you're really excited about maybe like city life or like going out at night, like Cambridge is definitely not the place for that, like on an everyday basis. But you can still kind of get around like on weekends and stuff if you want to go anywhere. There's like transportation is free for Waterloo students. So for us, we can take the bus to Waterloo and then we transfer onto the light rail. And that takes like over an hour, which like it's not ideal, but it's not too bad if you're maybe going to main campus like for a day. I think like, for example, like if you're from Hamilton like me, like a lot of places might take that long to bus to because it's like a decently big city.
Right.
So like relatively speaking, it's not too much different from that. It just feels different because you're in a small town. So like maybe like traveling for that long feels like too much, but in reality it's not too bad. Like you might have the similar experience like in other big cities. So yeah,
I see.
It's still possible to like travel around. There's also like go buses that will go directly from Cambridge to Mississauga, so you have options. It's just maybe they're not as expansive as we would like them to be at the moment. Yeah.
I see. Damn. Yeah. So
I've honestly heard that like it's not necessarily like that much better at main campus either. Like I think even for that city, it's considered to be on the smaller side. And I think there can be like pros and cons of being at main campus too. Like maybe if you find like the amount of students more overwhelming, or like maybe since we're always like in studio, it's more difficult to get out and socialize anyway. It's not as much of a problem as it appears to be. Like as an applicant, I think that would kind of be like my word of advice. Like maybe don't worry about the socializing part too much, because if you want to make it happen, like you can definitely make it happen. There's also clubs at our campus, but I think the bigger clubs are at main campus. But I see a lot of our like first year friends, like they would just carpool and go to main campus if they have like a club that they've joined. Like for example, most of the sports extracurriculars, they're at main campus. So I know a couple people in soccer, so they all carpool every week and they go to main campus, and it's not like too much of a time commitment. So yeah, I think like if you really want something to happen, you can make it happen. But if you enjoy like the quietness of Cambridge and you kind of like you're more introverted, like this is also like a good space for you. So I think it can still be flexible even if you're like further away from main campus. Yeah.
So it's not really like a huge con, a huge disadvantage?
Not really. No, I don't think so. Especially because like I think the biggest thing is like you're gonna be working most of the time.
Yeah.
So like it's not like you're gonna be dying to go out anyway, like all of the time. And the free time that you do have, I would say for this program, it's very like it's in chunks. So like you'll have a chunk of time, maybe like 3 weeks, where it's like really close to a final studio project, and that's when you'll probably be working most of the time. But then right after you submit, you'll probably have a good week or two where you're pretty much free, because that bigger workload before the deadline is suddenly gone, and you're back to like the initial stages of design with the next project. So I think in terms of that, and especially like in terms of how they scheduled it, like they try to give you as many weekends off as possible and stuff like that. So I think like it's easier to spend your free time like going to other cities or other places outside of Cambridge when you have larger chunks of time that are free. So I think they've kind of designed it in a way where it's easier to go out and spend your time in other places if you really want. So that's kind of why it's not like a super big issue in my opinion. Yeah, I think the main thing you're missing out on is maybe just like the atmosphere of being in a city. I think that's definitely one thing that like maybe someone enjoys, but it's not. It doesn't have to be a deal breaker. That's basically what I'm saying. Yeah.
So, like right now, someone in the chat is asking, "Hey Renelle, what's been your favorite part about university?"
It's a very broad question. I think like in terms of like the small community, I think that's probably been my favorite part, like being able to form closer connections to my peers. Like I've spent a lot of time with my roommates. Like we would have a lot of fun like in our place, and we would spend most of our time with each other. And that was possible because we had like the same classes and we were doing the same work. We had the same schedule. So I think there's ways that you can make that fun, like when you're around people that you like being with. And even like if that's not a thing for you, like being with your roommates, like you can always find other people in your program to be with. You can find upper years to be with. There's also like a good connection between the first years and upper years. So I think that's also like a really fun part about university. Like you have ample opportunity to talk to upper years and get help from them. So I think it's definitely that part of university that's made it fun. Like even if you're staying late at studio, you'll probably be there with other people. So you guys can like have some snacks, play some music, talk to each other. So yeah, I think just like the atmosphere of like being in the same, like the exact same boat is what can make it fun. And that's like what makes a lot of your memories as an architecture student. So yeah, I think that was probably the best part about university. Yeah, I feel like since I've only done one term, like my opinions will probably change. Like I've heard co-op is super, super fun because you can go international. And I think there is a stat somewhere that said that like over 70% of co-op students in architecture end up doing international co-ops.
Like so, in the US,
yeah, like, kind of. It's not like it's really like it's decently easy to do international. Like as I've seen with the amount of people who do it, like we have like a mentorship program where like some of the first years they're like grouped off and they're set up with a couple of master's students to kind of like meet up occasionally, you know, talk about like your designs in studio or just like any personal things. Like it's really like open-ended. And they were talking about how some of their friends got to do like a co-op in Paris for Celine, and they got to like design the runways and stuff. I've seen other people, they've gone to New York, San Francisco. So there's a lot of opportunities to go wherever you want. And I think like for many people, the highlight of their undergrad is probably like the traveling they get to do with co-op. So yeah, I'm sure that will definitely be like a big part of what makes your memories as an architecture student. So yeah.
Sounds really exciting actually.
Yeah.
Paris, San Francisco, okay.
I know.
Yeah, so I guess the question that's really been interesting to most people is how hard is it to be in the program? And like, are there any tips that you have for incoming freshmen?
Yeah, I think like it's obviously a very subjective question. Honestly, I think like more than any other program, like it's very subjective depending on just like how much experience you have in the arts. Like I know there's people who've come from art schools where they had to take art every semester, so they're well acquainted with like the kind of like demands that they have in terms of like how fast you have to do art. So maybe for those people, like time management is easier. It's easier for them to not have late nights or like anything like that. But then for someone who maybe hasn't had that many art classes, like for me definitely, like it's been a huge change, like getting used to the workload of art, because I think that kind of workflow is much different from a very STEM oriented workload, because you have to kind of set yourself up at the beginning of a project to try to make things the most easy for yourself so that you're not spending a crazy amount of time doing like certain details and stuff that might end up costing you a lot of free time. So I think that's definitely like the hardest part of adjusting to first year. Not even just the work itself, but figuring out how you need to complete the work. It's a very personal struggle. Like it's not something that you will know for sure until you're there.
Right.
Like see the projects and you complete them and you see like maybe where I'm lacking in terms of like time management, maybe perfectionism. There's so many things. So I think you can kind of almost answer that question yourself. Like, what do you think is lacking in your workflow? And that's probably what you're going to struggle with in this program, like for sure, like at least the first year. And the professors are really understanding of that, like for sure, like they completely understand that you're coming from high school where you might not have had the same kind of work as you do in architecture school. Like you're still getting used to the design process. You're getting used to like having to do studio all the time. And you're getting used to like designing as an architect, which like obviously you're gonna come in and probably not know anything about it unless you've done it like in your extracurriculars. So they're completely understanding of that, and even though it might be hard, like they're not gonna punish you for not doing it to the standard you think you need to do it. Like you know that it's gonna be hard. So yeah, I think like the hardest part is just like figuring it out, not even doing it necessarily, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think like for me definitely like it was like trying not to stay up too late was my biggest problem, because like I think for me, like since I'm like a pretty, I would call myself a perfectionist, like I would focus on little details rather than maybe like the bigger design itself. So that would end up like costing me more time because those details wouldn't even be that important in my final presentation because they won't look at them. So yeah, I think for me, it was just kind of like prioritizing what I actually need to finish and not wasting my time on things that no one's really going to pay attention to in the end. So yeah, for other people, like I know there's some people who already have like architecture education, they've worked with the softwares before, and for them it's not even about like it's not the same problem because they're already oriented to it, so they know how to not waste time. But maybe for them it's learning how to do more of the traditional parts of art because maybe they're not as good at that part. So practicing how to draw, things like that. So yeah, it definitely varies per person. Yeah,
that makes sense actually.
Yeah, like there's a very big variety of people in our program. Like you might think that everyone's kind of coming in with the same skills, but it's completely the opposite. Like there's people who are going to come in who are really, really good at digital art, for example. There's other people who've already used like Photoshop, they've already done 3D modeling. They're going to come in and they're going to immediately start using those programs even though they haven't taught it to you yet. There might be other people who've made a lot of handmade models before and they're going to be really fast at that. And you shouldn't be intimidated by that because eventually everyone's going to get to the same level in everything. Right now, you're kind of focusing on where you're lacking and like learning from your peers rather than using it as something to like tear you down. So yeah, I think like try not to compare yourself to other people who have skills that you don't, because chances are they don't have skills that you have that you just don't realize. So it's all about like I think first year especially, it's about like gaining skill sets from the people around you and like really taking time to just like look around and learn rather than like already being at a level where you can do everything. Because I think like this is what our professors tell us a lot. Like we've all come from like high school being used to being overachievers, which like I think for many people, like especially because of like the really strict admissions, like I can see how a lot of people have that mindset. They're used to doing really well at everything if they put enough effort. But here, you might put a lot of effort but still not get anywhere because you're still lacking in some areas, and that's fine. So I think you should just like completely lower your expectations, and everything will be a lot easier for you. Because the more open your mind is to learning and accepting that you're not good at something, the easier it will be to pick up those skills and like find the flaws in your workflow.
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that last advice can be really applied to almost any university program. It's
Yeah.
just getting used to it, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the juiciest question is, what are some things that, like, about the university or program that you don't think many people talk about?
Yeah, I think I've already addressed like one of the major ones, like being on a satellite campus. Like that's not really addressed much like during the admissions process because the goal is kind of just to get into the program, but not necessarily like the nitty-gritty parts of like maybe where you are in terms of location.
Yeah.
Because I guess that's not really the focus. It's more like, oh, like what kind of things do you learn? But like part of the university experience is definitely like where you are, like what kind of town you're living in, and just like the general atmosphere of like how many people you're usually around. And not being on main campus is definitely like it is a big deal. Like even if other people say like, oh, it doesn't matter, like it does affect like maybe your experience, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Like I think there's pros and cons to being on main campus, but also being on a satellite campus. So I think like it is worth like considering like how much it matters to you being on main campus. But I like in my opinion, I don't think it should be like a deterrent because you can still find ways to get involved at main campus no matter what. And especially in your upper years, like you can always commute from main campus, like if you really want. Although like they discourage it in first year, I think like the older you get, it's kind of natural that like you'll probably find your own place, or like you might lean more towards commuting, which is like a common trend, I think, in like a lot of programs.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's kind of like a major thing people don't talk about, but it's also not something you really, really need to be worried about either. So yeah, I think I've already mostly addressed it, but
yeah,
I think the other big thing that I haven't talked about yet is like the hustle culture, like maybe generally at Waterloo, but more so like the overnight culture and the late night culture that's really prominent in architecture, like as a subject. I think it's like a common thing to kind of poke fun at architecture because like, oh, like you stay up all night making a project and then your professor hates it. Like that, you see a lot of those like jokes on the internet, and like they're funny and like they may be true, but when it comes down to actually like being in studio and completing your projects, like that kind of culture can become like problematic. And I think our university really recognizes it, which is a good thing. Our professors are always like telling us to leave studio as soon as possible, go outside, take a break, eat lunch on time. And like I have this like vivid memory of like sitting beside my roommate in studio, and we were just like flipping through architecture books right after a critique. So we were like working hard to get everything done for that critique. Okay. And it was like 5:30 p.m. The sun already set, and our teacher's like, oh, and like she just came up to us. She was talking, and she's like, oh, I hope you guys like can go and have dinner now. And we're like, we didn't even have lunch. And she's like, she was just looking at us like, oh my god. So like, even though like that culture may be prominent, like people are always working hard to kind of like to completely flip that around. And I think like it's not encouraged, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. It's just already instilled into our subject. So yeah. It's just kind of like you have to keep that in mind, like when you're coming into a subject like this, like this kind of thing has already been so ingrained into our practice that like it's gonna happen inevitably. Like you're gonna see a lot of people at studio really, really late. People are gonna pull all-nighters even when there's not even a deadline, just like for the sake of pulling one so that maybe they can like spend the next day with their friends. But like it's not like completely not talked about, which is a good thing, because I think it's better that like we're trying to flip things around rather than this culture is there and we're not doing anything about it. So
Fair.
yeah, so I think like if you're someone who like has never really like stayed up late, or like you've always been super on top of like your time management, it could come as a shock for you. I know for some people it has been, because it makes you feel like you're not staying up late enough to do something, or you're not putting enough time into something. Even though that's not the case, like our professors always say that it like a project is never worth like sacrificing your health. And they never like they tell us they never actually assign something that should take us that should require us to like pull all-nighters or anything. So you have to keep that in mind. Like if their intention is you're not working overtime, then don't work overtime, at least to some extent. Like if you're staying up all night multiple days to do something, you're probably just doing something wrong and you're probably overcomplicating something. So I think that's also a big part of like combating the culture is like you have to like keep in mind what they're actually asking for. They're not asking you to stay up all night. You're just making yourself do that because you might just be reading into something too much, or you're not managing your time properly. So I think like it's just becoming more aware of your work habits and like telling the people around you to go sleep, go home, stop working, and just like having more empathy towards like other people and yourself is how we can like combat this. And yeah, it's definitely something you need to like have in your mind when you come to this program, or even any architecture program. It's not just this program, like yeah.
So just knowing how to manage your time well and not staying up all night.
Yeah, definitely.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And I think like another thing I could say, like even I said this at the beginning because this is how I was as an applicant. Like a lot of people like architecture because they're like, oh, I like art and I like science, so architecture is perfect for me. And one of our lecture professors, he was like mocking us because he's like, I know most of you said that in your interview, and that's not even completely accurate. And I think why he's saying that is because like architecture, like at the end of the day, it's its own subject. It's not just like combining art and science. It's its own thing because you're studying space and you're studying buildings. And that's not the same as like producing a piece of art or maybe like doing biology. So
yeah,
I think you have to keep in mind that just because you like art and you like science, it doesn't mean that you're gonna like architecture in the same way. It's definitely like it's a subject that's a lot different from art and science because it's focused on buildings. And I think like the very essence of architecture itself can be overlooked by applicants, and like the true purpose of architecture. So I think that's also something to keep in mind when you're deciding if you want to go into it. Like, do you truly know what architecture is, or are you just doing it because you think you're interested in other subjects that are related to it? So like maybe I would recommend like looking into the subject a little bit and seeing if you're actually interested in the practices around it, rather than kind of like making your own assumptions about it, because I think that's a lot like what a lot of people do, and that's what professors mock us for sometimes. So yeah, I recommend just like maybe researching a little bit, because architecture isn't like really taught that much in high school. So like you should probably become aware with what it truly is before making a decision about it.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
I've learned so many new things, and I'm not even applying to architecture.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've covered like pretty much everything you need to know as an applicant. So yeah. I think like Waterloo in general, like we have another open house in May, specifically for applicants who get into the program. So for architecture, we also have one at our campus. I think there also was an open house for like anyone, even if you haven't applied, but that one's already over. It happened in November. But if you get in, you can tour the university and they'll give you like a more in-depth like review about what you do in the program, like the rooms, the floors, your schedules. So yeah, I think this is all you like really need to know before the OUAC deadline.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, no problem.
We hope you, our viewers, and you, Renelle, had fun. Learned something new.
Yeah. I wish everyone who's applying to architecture and to Waterloo Architecture good luck. Like, even if you don't get in, just the fact that like you've been through this admissions process, you should be proud of that because the admissions process for this program is insane. So yeah, I think you should be proud of your achievements and even that you've come this far. Like if you're putting together your portfolio and all of that, like I think you're probably doing amazing. And if you need help with anything, you can also contact me. You can DM me at my username is Renelle with 3 R's. So
I'm gonna tag you in the live stream.
Yeah. So you can always DM me if you have like any more specific questions or like if you have any specific questions about your portfolio. I'm happy to help. And yeah, good luck. Don't stress too much.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.